Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating the Slate Transient Shaper and going over some really important concepts in mixing hip-hop drums. The Slate company hooked me up with the Slate Transient Shaper a little ahead of launch, said, could you make a video to it? I said, absolutely, let me put it through its paces, and thought to myself, what better source to put it through its paces than hip-hop drums? And by the way, this session actually comes from the Slate Academy, so if you are a Slate member, you can download the same session, mix along, do your own thing, have fun with it. All right, what I want to start with is just how the record sounds more or less faders up. The session comes with some inserts. I bypassed most of the processing that was there, but I kept some of it. So what you're about to hear is basically a faders up mix. All of these virtual mix racks here that you're about to see are all blank. They're just there so that I don't have to load them up. All right, we're starting from a really good place. Everything sounds great basically as is. We're just going to go for greater. Can we improve this? And so our first concept here, and the most important concept, is do we need to do anything? We really want to actualize and create a plan, especially with hip-hop drums, because the producer is usually pretty thorough about their drum selection. So we have to really think to ourselves, do the drums need anything at all? Maybe they're just perfect as is. So I'm going to play it again, and I'm going to really try to be objective about that. Now, I do think that there are some things that can be slightly improved, although I think we're actually starting pretty close to where we need to end up. Here's concept 2. In hip-hop, the drums are like guitars in rock. The guitars in rock are such a focal element, you have to get them right, and they need to be big. Hip-hop, drums, same idea. We want the drums to be as big as possible without making the rest of the record completely disappear. So when I'm listening to this, what I'm hearing is that the drums are basically where they need to be, but there's two things lacking that are really going to give them that larger-than-life presence. The first is a sense of three-dimensionality. For me, I need hip-hop drums to actually step out of the speaker. They need to have I would even say fourth dimensional quality. I want to have the snare like hit me in the neck. I want the kick to hit me in the stomach. I need to physically feel those drums, and they need to feel so forward that they actually feel like they're in front of the speaker, not with the speaker. And right now it feels a little two-dimensional. It feels like they're sitting kind of with the speaker. So I definitely want to enhance that. The other thing is cohesiveness. In my opinion, I feel hip-hop drums really come together when all the drums sound like they belong as part of the same kit. So they need to share a certain homogeneity in terms of their tone, their texture, a sense of glue. And while I do think that these drums do get along really well, I think that they could be just a little tighter in terms of their cohesion. All right, let's listen again with those things in mind and then figure out a plan. Okay, I've got a few ideas. So the first thing that I want to do actually has nothing to do with Transient Shaper at all, but it is something that I want to do as a first step, and that is add a bit of reverb to the overall drums. Now, be careful with reverb when you're dealing with hip-hop drums. You really want your drums usually to be pretty tight, pretty punchy, and reverb can take away from that. So I'm going to turn my reverb return all the way up. It's a short plate, under a second long, and it's pretty glossy and pretty open sounding. This reverb is doing two things. It's putting a homogeneous tone on all of the drums, and it's also allowing the sustain, the envelope of the snares and hats to kind of follow into the next hit. So it kind of creates a stream of sound that helps the sound glue together a little bit more. Now, I think it's a little too glossy sounding. I really want to dirty it up. So my processing here is going to be taking a trimmer and just pushing the level almost full blast here into the Hollywood saturator, set to push mode, preamp with the saturation turned all the way up, and then a following trim plugin turning it back down. So here's our before and after on that. So this adds some hair, some texture, it brings the low mids up to kind of meet the highs, and it also changes the envelope of the reverb to extend it just a little bit more. And all of those things are going to help to create a better sense of cohesion overall. Now, I have it turned down 24 dB from here, so I'm going to set that back in here. And basically, this is allowing it so that there's just this sense of cohesion. You don't even really hear much in terms of reverb, even when we're in this sort of soloed mode. Just a little bit of air behind the drums. Okay, let's move on from there. Now, let's listen to what we can improve the most. What do I think needs the most touch, the most bit of love here? If I'm being honest, I would say the snare, because right now the snare feels like it's loud enough. It feels like it's the right level, but it still feels like it's sitting flat. It still feels a little two-dimensional. If I turn it up a little bit more, it will become more dimensional, but it's going to start becoming pretty overwhelming. Yeah, now we're starting to get that stepping out of the speaker effect, but it really is starting to feel like the snare is bordering on too loud, and I have a feeling by the time I get that dimensionality that I want, the snare is just going to be overwhelming everything. So, how am I going to bring the snare to life? Alright, I'm going to do a technique that's sort of a variation on the Fabian Marasciullo transient enhancement technique that he did on a lot of the Cash Money records. He still does it, except for he doesn't do it with a punch gate anymore. This is the way that he was originally doing it, but this is basically going to be the same technique, but with a couple little Weiss modifications here. Alright, I'm going to duplicate my snare track. This is going to become a track that I call Snarelel, right? Oh yeah. I'm pretty cool. Definitely take this name. This is probably the most important thing in this tutorial. The Snarelel channel. In the Snarelel channel, I'm going to load up a few plugins. The most important plugin is going to be the Transient Shaper. This is the only way this technique works, if we have this. And I'm going to make that my middle one. In front of the Transient Shaper, I am going to put an exciter. I'm going to put FG36A. This is going to give me some really good texture right here. And then on the back end of this, I need a limiter of some sort. I've got a few limiter options. I think the one that I want to go for is going to be maybe this this one, this U73 here in limiter mode. Okay, but we're going to bypass that for now. We're going to bypass the Transient Shaper. Okay, first things first, let's pull up the intensity on this snare channel. Let's dip the output down so that we don't get too loud and start pushing it up. Yeah, I want to be pretty indulgent on this, so I'm thinking a little bit harsh might be okay. And then I'm going to dip the output down so that it kind of matches a little better. Okay, now here comes the real sauce. I want to focus in on just having transient energy. So I'm going to monitor the transients here. This is a really well thought out plugin, I should say, by the way. One of the things that's really great about it is that it's got a timing control that allows me to adjust the envelope between the transition between the attack and the sustain, so I can have like a more tight focused attack or kind of a broader attack that I'm targeting. That's a really, really cool thing. And then in addition to that, I can actually monitor just the transient return or just the sustain return, and I think that is super, super cool. Yeah, right there. So it's like just attack, but like the fullest representation of the attack that I can get. Yeah, that might actually even be better. Cool, so that's my transient. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip the sustain all the way down, and I'm going to turn the transient all the way up. I'm going to turn the makeup down a little bit as well. So now I've just got this isolated, sharp, excited, transient sound. Last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put just a little bit of limiting on there. And what this is going to do is just thicken up the attack sound that I've got. It's going to add just a little bit of color and a little bit of duration to that attack. Where are we? There we go. So this is what we started with. And this is what we're ending with. Now we have this really cool transient attack tone that we can use as a parallel return to enhance our snare. So I'm going to pull this in with the rest of everything else, and I'm basically just going to push this snare channel up until basically I don't like it anymore. And the more I can get, the better. So this is a really, really powerful effect because I can get the snare to come super far forward, but it never really feels like it's overwhelming the rest of the record because the energy that I'm bringing forward is happening over such a short duration of time. So it's a great way to get a sense of three-dimensionality and spark and pop into a snare drum without even really totally changing the sound of the snare and without masking other elements and other instruments. So super cool technique. Steal it, make it your own, make better mixes. Go ahead. All right, let's play it again. I think from here I want to address the kick drum. I really like the kick, but I think that it needs a little bit of refining in terms of the overall shape. This kick is really punchy. It's like almost spiky in terms of the attack. And not that I recommend ever doing this, but just to kind of illustrate the point, if I zoom in on this kick, you can see that there's a ton of attack tone right here up front. Like there's just a huge spike right there, and then the sustain is relatively kind of low. I think I want to make it so that it's a little bit more sustain focused. I feel like all of that body and all of that texture and all of the fun of this kick drum is really living in the sustain. And while that punch can be great, I think that I want a little bit less of it relative to the sustain. So what am I going to do? We're going to go back over here to Transient Shaper. Let's grab this. Cool. So there's a couple of things that are really well thought out in this. I already pointed out our time constant change and our monitoring, which I think are just brilliant right off the bat. One of the other things I really like in this is that there's a soft clipper right here in the transient section. Because remember, this is a transient shaper. It's not a transient louderizer or quieterizer. It's shaping the transient. And that's what we're really aiming to do here. I think that we can round this transient off. In addition to just lowering the transient, I think we can round it off a little bit. And that's actually going to give us a much better sound. So I'm going to go back over to my monitor here. I'm going to target the punch of the kick. I think we need a little shorter of an envelope. Maybe even a little shorter, but we're pretty close. Yeah, I want to keep as much of that low in there as possible, as much of that sustain in there as possible. Okay, yeah, that's what I want to target. Now, what I'm going to do is start turning the transient down. Yeah, I think about there is probably good. And now I'm going to soft clip a little bit just to kind of round it out a touch. So I'm noticing that when the light's going off, I'm hearing a little bit of fuzz. I'm going to reduce that a little bit. I think that we're getting a little soft clipping even before the light's really going. Yeah, that sounds about right. I guess the light is kind of flickering, but you kind of have to squint one eye and look in. All right, so we took off about 3.7 on the transient. Let's do about 3.7 of makeup here. And what we're really effectively doing is bringing the sustain up to meet the transient. So before, after. I think we can actually do a little more makeup gain. I guess this is not really dB. This is just scale. Yeah, I'm watching my peak meter here. I've still got some room to go. Nice. Now, maybe I went a hair overboard. I think I'm going to use this mix knob. Again, another really smart feature of this transient shaper. This is like such a good utilitarian transient shaper. So I'm going to pull this mix down to maybe about 66%, 2/3. See how that feels. Yep, that's what I want right there. Cool. Let's hear that in the mix. Let's copy this over to the second kick track here. All right, I'm going to do one other thing here. This is not transient shaper related, but this is just going to be something to get a little bit of extra hit from the kick. The kick by itself sounds really good. However, we have an 808 underneath the kick the entire time. And because of that, I don't think we need quite so much sub on the kick. Or maybe it's like the right amount of sub, but maybe the kick could come up if the sub comes down. So if I take off maybe like, well, let's see how much starts to sound bad. I think about 2.5 dB off of the sub is probably where I sort of don't notice it anymore. Yeah, it feels like it blends a little better. And now that I've run off about 2.5 dB here, I can actually boost my kick up overall. So let's add a couple dB of level to the kick back. Yeah, now we're getting some good hit. I'm also noticing some of the treble stuff, some of the crunchy stuff starting to come up a little bit. I think I'm going to roll off a little bit of super top end. Yeah. Before, after. And maybe just sneak a hair. Now that I've done this, I'm going to sneak just a hair of that transient back in. And I think we're going to be good. Yeah, right there. Little dab will do you. All right. Let's copy that on over. This is what we got. I think actually I got it right the first time. I think this transient could come down back to where it was. Yep. Yeah, that feels really good. Cool, we're going to stick with that. All right, let's address these hats. Yeah. So the hat is really interesting. With hi-hats, I feel like stylistically the difference between a pop record that has trap influence and an actual trap hi-hat is in the voicing of the hi-hat. And I'll show you what I mean. If I was doing this for a pop record, there's like a pinch to the hi-hat. There's like a slightly metallic tone and then there's kind of a higher tone. And I would kind of smooth those out a little bit. So I'll probably do something like this. Before, after. And then maybe just add like a broad little pop. Or maybe not even. Actually, we might not need it. But basically, it's adding a little bit more body overall to the sound. So pretty subtle there. However, in this case, I kind of want to do the opposite. I really like my trap hi-hats to be really tingy, really sharp. So, okay, to do that, I'm thinking Transient Designer, probably a good starting place. Let's grab that. And here, I want to focus in on like the sharpest part of the sound. Yeah, like that thing. Really ticky sound. Then I'm going to push some transient up and pull some sustain down and just kind of negotiate between the transient and the sustain until I get something that's like really ticky. Yeah, that's pretty good. And now I'm going to add in revival. I like this as the exciter here. FG36 can be a little bit too compression heavy, and the other Slate exciter, which I'm blanking on the name of it, it's a little too smooth, I think. Revival has like this way of adding grain in addition to exciting things, and I think because of the texture of the snare and the texture of the kick, a little bit of grain is actually going to be really perfect for this sound. Yeah, really bright, really plinky, kind of grainy. Nice. That's what we're going for. And I think the one other thing is I just want to take out that kind of metallic, almost I hate to say bassy because it doesn't really make sense for a hi-hat, but I guess the base of a hi-hat, if you think about it, is like 1.5K, which we normally think of as being upper mids. That's really like the bass range for a hi-hat. So I just want to get a little bit of that down. Nice. Might be a little ticky. Let's back it off just a hair. Well, let's hear it. Actually, let's hear it in the record. That'll tell us if we're right. So before. After. Yeah, that feels a lot more like a trap style hat. I definitely dig that. I like that a lot better. I think we're in a really good place. I think I just want to bring it all home, bring it all together. So I'm going to go to the drum bus now. And that's going to be my final step, I think. Or at least for the purposes of the tutorial. Um, okay. My favorite bus device here, maybe ever, is FG Bomber. FG Bomber is really cool. You can get like so much motion and movement and attitude out of it. It is technically a transient designer. So Transient Shaper is not the first Slate transient designer. FG Bomber is, but the use case is really different. They feel very, very different. FG Bomber is like a purely creative, feel driven, movement driven transient designer, whereas Transient Shaper is more like the complement to that. It's when you really need to be precise and specific about what you're doing and you need to get something technically done. That's where Transient Shaper really, really shines. So I'm going to get the movement that I want from FG Bomber. Oh, let's turn our output down here so that nobody goes deaf. There's something really cool happening when I start to push the drive. There's almost this like heartbeat thing happening in the low end. I kind of love that. It's like I feel that bounce. It's one of those things where it's like it feels good and sounds horrible because I've got the intensity up so much, but basically this just allows me to pinpoint what kind of movement I want to hear from it. Like, do I want really front end driven movement like this? Or do I want like really inside groove driven movement like this? And I kind of love the feel of this inside groove thing, even though it sounds really weird right now. I'm just going to throw it into tight or present just to see how that feels, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to stick with fat on this. I'm glad I checked. I actually really like the color and crunch and weird distortions that I'm getting from type mode. I feel like I'm still getting that heartbeat effect, but I'm also getting some of the, like the slide movements in the 808 a little bit more. That's pretty darn cool. I do like what present mode is doing to the snare, but I think overall I like tight mode the best. So we're going to go with that. And now I'm just going to back off the intensity into where it no longer sounds bad, and I just get a little bit of that feel of the groove going. Nice. So I've got that little bit of movement going, but I do feel like I'm losing a little bit of the snare and some of the leading edge of the kick because of the way this is reshaping the transients. So I'm going to use Transient Shaper in conjunction with FG Bomber to get the best of both worlds here. Now that I've got the movement that I'm looking for, I'm going to now bring back that hit from the snare and that leading edge on that kick. So let's go back into our transient monitoring and let's focus in on that. Nice. Now let's, actually, let me look at the timing of that. Yeah, this is letting me focus on something a little tighter. Okay, cool. Let's pull that transient up so that we don't lose any more snare. Nice. Before? Now, I do think that I can kind of bring a little bit more fullness into the sound after Bomber is doing its thing. So before Bomber, I'm actually going to pull up some of the sustain. So it's a little weird, but I'm going Transient Shaper into Bomber into Transient Shaper, and that's going to ultimately give me what I'm looking for here. All right, without. With. And if I can control that transient with just the tiniest bit of clipping. There we go. Just so we can soften whatever the final limiter is going to do. Nice. All right. Let's hear it, and then let's bring in the other elements and listen again. Without our drum bus processing. With. Alright, let's jump back to where we started real quick before we wrap this up. We didn't have any of this stuff on at all. We didn't have any of this stuff on. There we go. At all. And it sounded like this. We didn't have that snare low. There we go. Now let's bring all that stuff back. Why are we not coming back? Come on. There we go. And let's bring in our snarl return and our drum processing. Nice. So to wrap this up, here's our concepts in a nutshell. 1. Make sure we're being objective and assess what the drums actually need, then form a plan in terms of what we're trying to do before we actually start doing it. 2. Start looking for the physicality of the drum. Is it stepping out of the speaker or is it laying flat in the speaker? Hip hop likes it when the drums are stepping out of the speaker. 3, make sure that there's some sense of cohesion, some kind of textural or tonal type of glue between all the different drums, even if they're coming from different sample kits. And then we bring it all together, and that's what makes for a great hip-hop drum mix. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.